The best of money matters. The Big Story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Nadiah Koh. The battle for Singapore's next parliament is now officially underway. Nominations have closed across 9 nomination centres today. Prospective candidates have made their bids for 97 seats across 33 constituencies. So, some surprise moves today, big names and hot contests. For a deeper analysis of the movements from today's nomination day, joining us is Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the Singapore Management University School of Law. Hi Eugene, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nadia. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start with talking about the walkover. The PAP won its first constituency at the 2025 GE in the 5-member Marine Parade Braddell Heights GRC via a walkover. Eugene, was this an unexpected move? Were there already signs of a walkover?
No, I think it was really, no one saw it coming. And, everyone, assumed, right, that in a more competitive environment, every seat will be contested. I mean, people were even talking about, multi-cornered fights. So I think, the voters of Marine Parade Braddell Heights, would be disappointed that they will not be able to cast their ballots. There were no signs of a walkover, although, right, I don't know whether the PAP may have read correctly, WP's body language, if I could put it that way, that it may not have been so serious, right, because we now have in Marine Parade a GRC, which does not have a minister or someone who is of ministerial rank, as the anchor. But again, how the PAP knew or at least figured that, there was a good chance that the WP would not contest there. I mean, we don't know. But yes, I think, this is something really unexpected. And I think it might make it a bit more difficult for WP, to walk the ground there, unless, they've been able to persuade voters that they had, a good reason for not contesting there.
So, right, you mentioned that this might make it a bit more difficult for the Workers' Party. So, is this a right decision on their part? What kind of repercussions are we looking at in the next election?
Well, I think, the WP decided that, they would rather concentrate their resources, on areas where they feel that they have good prospects. But the only question is, they shouldn't have left it so late. But I suppose all this has part to do with, tactical strategy. And obviously now, they are focusing very much on Tampines and Punggol, where I think, these are 2 constituencies, GRCs, where, we will see very keen competition. So in a way, the WP has taken a rather conservative approach in this GE. I think they are very focused on wanting to win at least another GRC or even SMC. So they want to increase, the number of seats that they have. And I think their assessment is that, the Punggol demographic is probably quite similar to Sengkang GRC, which they had that famous victory 5 years ago in 2020. And I think this is where they are hoping that, voters will understand where they're coming from and that, in this very careful, moderated approach, they would be able to increase, the number of seats and then be a bigger force in Parliament.
Right. I just want to go back to the PAP. With all that has been said, what kind of leverage will this walkover have for them?
I wouldn't say that there would be, a lot of leverage for the PAP. Right? I think, the PAP is the only party that contests in all seats. The opposition parties, still have some way to go. And that includes the Workers' Party. They are still not even anywhere close to contesting in 1/3 of the seats. So I think this is something that, the WP, will have to work on. I think they are really saying that, we are very focused, and that voters in the constituencies that they are contesting in, they should recognize that and should, seriously consider putting a vote for them, right? So they are not spreading their resources thin, right? And so they're urging voters, we are only contesting in 5 GRCs and 2 SMCs. This is a very targeted approach, so we are not greedy, we want to win more seats. And so that's why we are concentrating our resources. So I don't think there will be any leverage and I don't think the ruling party would gain much, from harping on this walkover.
Right. Eugene, another major talking point from today are the multi-cornered fights. So the stage is set for a 4-way fight in Tampines GRC, while PAP and WP will go head-to-head in Tampines Changkat SMC. What's at play here when it comes to a big multi-cornered fight like this? What's really at stake?
Well, I think what's really at stake is more for the voters, right? Particularly those who are keen to support the opposition, right? They will have to decide, among the two or three opposition parties, who is it that they want to support? How do they ensure, that the votes do not split, across the three opposition parties? But I think, with the Workers' Party in the fray, in these multi-cornered fights, I think voters will recognize that that the WP, among other opposition parties contesting in that particular constituency, that Workers' Party, will have the best prospects. And so what will happen is that, we are likely to see, voters putting their votes, behind the WP. And what will actually happen is that this does happen, then there won't be significant vote splitting. And what could result is that the other one or two opposition parties could, as a result, lose their electoral deposits. Now, of course, in a very close contest between the PAP and the WP, a couple of percentage points going to the other opposition parties, could mean a win or a loss, for the WP. So I think that's something, that cannot be denied. But again, I think the stakes are really a lot higher for the non-WP opposition.
Right. So how will this also impact the incumbent party's votes?
Well, I think, for the incumbent, I don't think, it make their quest, to win any easier, right? Because they're dealing with a very formidable Workers' Party, so the ruling party will still have to canvass and fight hard for every vote. Yes, they may think that they have a slight advantage, because of the possibility of some vote dilution, but I think they will also be aware, that there wouldn't be significant vote splitting, right? So the margins could be very narrow, and so they have their work cut out for them.
Eugene, we're also seeing a three-cornered fight in Ang Mo Kio for the first time in history. How significant is this development in the upcoming election?
I think, in the end, it's, the prospects of, taking on team led by Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong is perhaps attractive, for some opposition parties, So I think there is the view that, this gives voters a chance, to, in a way, have a referendum on Mr. Lee's, 20-year tenure as Prime Minister between 2004 and 2024. But again, I think here in the three-cornered fight, because the WP is not involved and then we have two small parties, I think here the signaling effect to voters will not be as clear, right? So if you're a voter in Ang Mo Kio, and you ask yourself, which opposition party would have the better chance, whether is it the SUP or the PPP, I think voters would be hard-pressed, to say, that one of the opposition parties is clearly stronger than the other, right? So this is where, in contrast, let's say, to Tampines, we are probably going to see vote splitting. Right? And depending on how the votes split, there is a possibility, that one or both opposition parties could lose their electoral deposit.
Right. Eugene, I want to segue a little to the names that won't be contesting this year. One of the more notable surprises is that the last time Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat was revealed to be standing in East Coast GRC instead of Tampines GRC. And now DPM Heng will not be running in GE2025, retiring after 15 years in politics. So thoughts there on DPM Heng bowing out, also from a legacy point of view?
Yes, I mean, it is a relatively short political career for DPM Heng, who was once selected by his peers, to be the successor, right, to Lee Hsien Loong, as PM as well as party leader. I think, we will miss DPM Heng's leadership, but I think as he pointed out, he feels that it is the right time, now that, you have Mr. Lawrence Wong, secure in office as the Prime Minister. But I think, Singapore will still benefit, had he continued, in politics. We are, in a way, Mr. Heng, will be the first senior 4G leader to retire. And I think, he would have his reasons for it. But I also believe, that, the party is confident, that there will be others, who can step up, to the plate. But overall, I don't think we will see, Mr. Heng, fading into the sunset. I'm sure, there'll be other ways, in which he will still contribute, to Singapore.
Right. Senior Minister Teo Chee Hean will also not be contesting in this election as well, but he has not mentioned whether he will still be in politics. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, like DPM Heng, I think Senior Minister Teo is almost effectively, retired from politics, because I not seen a PAP senior politician, who did not contest in one general election and then comes back in another. So I think he too, probably takes a view that it is the right time, now that the fourth generation leadership is in place. And of course, there is the need for third generation leaders to make way, right? So we saw that with Defense Minister Dr. Ng Han. So I think, in terms of the senior leaders from the third generation, that leaves, Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong, DPM Gan Kim Yong, and Home Affairs and Law Minister K. Shanmugam, right? And I think for all we know, by the next general election, in 4 to 5 years' time, there may or may not be any leaders from the third generation.
Right. I want to go back to Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim Yong. In even more surprises, DPM Gan will lead the PAP against the Workers' Party in the newly created Punggol GRC. He will face off against Senior Counsel Harpreet Singh, who is heading the WP team. What are your thoughts on this surprise decision?
Well, it is clear the ruling party is taking, the threat from the WP very seriously, right? So seriously that they feel it necessary, to redeploy, right, a seasoned campaigner in DPM Gan Kim Yong, from his constituency in Choa Chu Kang GRC to Punggol GRC. So they have their work cut out for them. I don't think, they will take the Punggol team from WP lightly, even though it comprises of first-time candidates. So obviously, they're not taking it lightly, and they feel that, they need firepower, with Gan Kim Yong coming into the picture. So I think we'll see a very keen contest. This is not the first time that the ruling party, has redeployed a heavyweight in view of, the competition from the Workers' Party. They did that in 2020 when they moved DPM Heng, from Tampines, to East Coast. And I think that worked because had DPM Heng not moved, my view is that the ruling party would have probably lost East Coast GRC in 2020. So I think they're hoping that this particular effort of deploying a very well-regarded senior politician from the party, will enable the ruling party, to fend off, the serious challenge from the Workers' Party.
Right. So to add on these movements, what are your thoughts on Choa Chu Kang GRC? Because Manpower Minister Tan See Leng was moved to Choa Chu Kang GRC to lead the PAP slate, replacing DPM Gan Kim Yong.
Yeah, so that in a way, because of DPM Gan Kim Yong's move, the PAP needed another anchor, to step in for DPM Heng. I was surprised that they decided to redeploy Manpower Minister Tan See Leng, but I suppose they probably saw that there was either going to be a walkover in Marine Parade or that the Workers' Party was not in contest there and some other opposition party would step up, and that the slate, without a minister, would be able to tame that constituency, for the PAP. And so they then move, Dr. Tan to Choa Chu Kang GRC. So again, because of the movement by DPM Heng, there would then be these other, consequential movement, right? I mean, the interesting thing would be, if the WP had contested and put in the papers for Marine Parade GRC, then the question would be, whether they would have moved Dr. Tan, and if they didn't move him, who would then anchor the PAP slate in Choa Chu Kang, right? But now, that doesn't matter, right? The focus is clearly, will be on Punggol, right? Where the ruling party sees a very significant threat from the Workers' Party.
Right. Eugene, just one more question on this reshuffling. Over to Aljunied, we'll be seeing a reshuffled Workers' Party team with Faisal Manap moving over to Tampines and Pritam Singh leading a new slate that includes Kenneth Tiong and Fadli Fauzi. Meanwhile, the PAP is fielding a new team led by Chan Hui Yi. What do you think motivated the shift for the Workers' Party, and what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that, again, the Workers' Party believes that Tampines could offer a very good electoral outing, for them. And so, they have moved Faisal Manap, who has been an MP since 2011. And I think it's really, again, trying to demonstrate that the Workers' Party should be seen as a multiracial party. Not that there are any doubts about that, right? But I also am a bit concerned about the Faisal Manap, moving to Tampines, because it would seem that this would be a contest for the Malay Muslim vote, because Mr. Masagos, of course, is the Minister in charge of Muslim Affairs, and Mr. Faisal Manap, has been very active in Parliament in raising Malay Muslim community issues. So I think here, we are potentially looking, at a very keen contest. But deploying, Mr. Faisal Manap to Tampines also enables the WP to put another new candidate in Aljunied, right? Because Aljunied had also lost Leon Pereira, who had resigned 2 years ago. And so, that in a way will enable the WP, to now have two new MPs. Even if the number of seats they win do not increase, they will have two other party members who would become members of parliament. So again, these are tactical moves, that seek to expand the WP's reach. And I think, we can expect also that keen contest in Tampines, right? But perhaps not as keen as the one in Punggol. And of course, it demonstrates that the WP is also confident, that with only 3 of the 5 MPs remaining in Aljunied, that is enough firepower for them to retain Aljunied GRC.
Right. Speaking of that intense matchup, we're also expecting an intense rematch over at West Coast, Jurong West GRC between the PAP and PSP. Particularly, PAP's Desmond Lee will be up against former PAP stalwart Tan Cheng Bock, who now leads the PSP. What do you think the return of Tan Cheng Bock to politics means for this rematch?
Well, he is a significant figure, right? Because he is, despite not being in parliament, because he gave way for his 2 other colleagues to be NC MPs, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock is still a prominent force. And of course, he has also dropped hints that, this could very well, be his last general election. And I think the hope is that, voters consider that seriously, that this is the last chance, for Dr. Tan, to enable his still relatively young PSP, to win seats in parliament outright. And of course, they are up against a PAP team led by National Development Minister Desmond Lee, who is obviously, taking the challenge very seriously. And of course, leading the team, right? I mean, the easier option would be to move him to a safer seat. But I think that the ruling party is also indicating, right, with Mr. Lee as the anchor in the GRC, that, they will be able to defend their seats in West Coast, Jurong West GRC. We can expect a keen contest, although I think, with the electoral boundaries changes, I think that there could be a slight benefit to the ruling party. And so I wouldn't be surprised, if the PAP wins, with a slightly bigger margin this time. But it will be a keen contest all the same.
Okay. So Eugene, now that nominations have come to a close, where do voters go from here? What will they really have to think about?
Well, they will have 9 days of, starting from today to this evening, right? Intense campaigning. And so, they will have to consider which party they would want to support, because they are not just, seeking to put in place their elected representatives, but the Singapore system also means that, they could also be deciding indirectly which party, would form the government, right? And even if people assume that the PAP, because they're contesting in all seats, the WP, is contesting the limited number of seats, that it is a foregone conclusion. I think it is, for the PAP, they do want a firm mandate from the people, right? So I think voters will have to decide who they would want to represent them in parliament, who they would want to form the government. And then they will have to see, how the issues, how the parties have proposed, to deal with some of the top-of-the-mind issues that Singapore and Singaporeans face. And then, on May the 3rd, after the cooling off day on 2nd May, they will then cast their ballots, and the choices they make, obviously, will have that impact on Singapore, right? It may just be one vote, but you could imagine, if you have a couple of 100,000 voters, voting in one particular direction, that could mean perhaps even significant changes to Singapore's political system, right? So I think voters will be very mindful of that. And I think certainly, they would want the best men and women, right? Not just in terms of credentials, but in terms of their dedication, to serve them in parliament. And I think it will determine, how Singapore's political system will evolve in the next decade. So I think this will be a consequential general election.
Right. Eugene, before we let you go, anything else that you'll be keeping a close watch on before we go to the polls on the 3rd of May?
No, I think, Nadiah, you have raised all the hot seats. But I think, we should always be prepared for surprises on the campaign trail, controversies, to be ignited. But I think, voters must stay focused on who they think, would be good for Singapore and for Singaporeans.
All right. Thank you so much, Eugene, for your amazing insights today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the Singapore Management University. This has been The Big Story with me, Nadiah Koh.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.